Karen Andrews, thanks for joining me. Labor for Refugees have said, well, in a memo last year, they've been told by Kristina Keneally that once she's in government, then she'll look at moving against having offshore processing of refugees. She today denied saying that. Do you believe her?
Well, look, quite frankly, I think we've all got to question what Labor is saying about their support or otherwise for Operation Sovereign Borders. On the one hand, they say they do support Operation Sovereign Borders, but they also are very clear that they don't support temporary protection visas, and that is one of the three key pillars of Operation Sovereign Borders. So if they don't understand what Operation Sovereign Borders actually is and what those three pillars are, I don't think the Australian public can rely on anything they say and any commitments that they might make to maintaining Operation Sovereign Borders, because they clearly aren't going to.
But her argument about this is, well, temporary protection visas apply to people who've come here years ago, and the government said, look, if you come here, then you're not going to be able to settle permanently, you'll get no permanent residency. She said they haven't been applied since Sovereign Borders came in, that people aren't landing here, so you don't hand out TPVs to anyone. Has she got a point?
No, I don't think she has a point at all, and she clearly doesn't understand temporary protection visas and what their value actually is as a deterrent in the first instance. So, I mean, some of the stats for temporary protection visas are, in fact, they're fascinating because they tell the story of the value of temporary protection visas as a key pillar of Operation Sovereign Borders.
Kristina Keneally, the Labor spokesman there, she did say something else today. She picked up on your comments yesterday on radio where you were very firmly implying that the deal, that China signed this deal with the Solomon Islands last week for a defence sort of understanding. It signed it last week in order to interfere with our election, to apparently embarrass the Morrison government. Now, you've been challenged by Kristina Keneally. She said you're in caretaker mode and therefore you have to, by convention, then share the intelligence with her as to what led you to suspect this. If there is intelligence, maybe you could clear that up. What are you going to do? Are you going to show her this intelligence, or are you going to say, well, I don't actually have intelligence, I'm just going from intuition?
Well, I'll tell you what I thought was extraordinary about Labor's response to the interview that I gave yesterday, and I was very careful with the language that I used. It seems to me to be very clear that Labor has not contemplated what action China might take post the inking of that agreement with the Solomon Islands. I think it's extraordinary.
No, but can I take you back to my question? Can I take me back to the question, please? The question is, you yesterday said, you know, why in the middle of a federal election campaign is all this coming to light? I mean, we talk about political interference in many forms, so we've got to talk about China. That was your implication, right? China signed it last week in order to interfere with our election, this deal with the Solomon Islands.
Actually, I said...
Do you have intelligence briefings to that effect, or were you just intuiting it?
I was very careful with my words, and what I indicated is that questions seriously should be asked about the timing of that agreement. Now, I think that what has happened since then is that there has been some commentary by some pretty significant people about what they think the options might be. The important thing is that as a nation, we need to be looking very closely at what the next steps of China are going to be. So I know that there's a lot of interpretations on what I said, but what I did say is that there should be questions asked about the timing of that. That is an eminently sensible thing for any nation to be doing. We know that China is interested in what is happening in the Pacific region, and they have been for some time. We know they have reached and entered into an agreement with the Solomon Islands. What are the next steps in that process? If we are going to be prepared to work with our close neighbours in the Pacific, which we are, we need to be working very closely and having a very close look at what is happening there and trying to work out what the next steps may well be in our backyard, which is the Pacific Islands. So I was very careful. I think what I said yesterday was entirely reasonable, and I've had a lot of feedback from many people that I've spoken to since then, and they're very firmly of the view that we should be questioning the timing of these agreements and what the future is going to be in that area. That is, in my view, an entirely reasonable line of questioning.
Karen Andrews, thank you so much for your time.